We're 8 months into this presidency, and this man's reputation has already been terminally trashed.
I thought that he made Donald Trump look like an intellectual international statesman of the highest order with that speech yesterday. To say he has no regrets, how can you look at what's going on in Kabul and say, I have no regrets? How can you pretend to be a defender of women's rights and gay rights and just pull out like that and leave women and gay people in Afghanistan to God knows what kind of a fate? The hypocrisy there was extraordinary, and I thought the worst aspect of this really, truly awful speech was the fact he started off by saying, I'm the President of the United States of America and the buck stops with me, and then proceeded to blame everyone else. It was Donald Trump's fault for deciding to pull America out in the first place. It wasn't Donald Trump's fault. The decision lies with the sitting president. That's him. Also, it's the Afghans' fault for not fighting hard enough. I mean, it was shirking responsibility on an epic scale, wasn't it?
Well, it was, and it's going to come back and haunt us and him and America for the rest of his presidency and beyond at our enormous cost, because what this is going to be is to put a shot in the arm of terrorism and Islamism across the world, and particularly in Europe, and maybe even especially in Britain. We are extremely vulnerable here in this country, and the Taliban is now calling all the shots through not just Afghanistan, but Pakistan and elsewhere, and its emissaries around the world will now feel that they are licensed to kill. And I just dread to think what's going to happen on the streets of Europe and Britain over the coming months and years.
See, I completely sympathise with any nations that have concerns about putting their young people, their men and their women in the forces into foreign territories that are dangerous like Afghanistan. But Joe Biden, of course, is inspired by the fact that 75% of Americans feel that they should never have been in Afghanistan. That he thinks there's votes in it. That's fair enough. Same for us. However, Afghanistan is a very, very complex situation, and you can't just say, right, up stumps, we're going, just like that. It has to be a more careful process than that. And as he sought to blame Donald Trump for the original decision, I believe Donald Trump, although known to be fairly reckless, had listened to his military advisors and wasn't about to do what Joe did over the weekend.
No, I think that, to be absolutely honest, Trump was right to say that the West had to pull out of Afghanistan. We couldn't stay in there forever. There was no question of the Afghan army ever being prepared to stand up to the Taliban once left to their own devices. And so, in a sense, Biden is right to say that they had to leave. We had to leave. The NATO alignment was collapsing anyway. There was no other forces involved there to any extent except America and Britain. So we had to get out. It was the way that we got out that was most important. And on that count, we failed not just ourselves, but the Afghan people themselves and the women and children who will suffer dreadfully in that country.
Now, it wasn't only Joe Biden that was dreadfully misinformed about the situation with the Taliban in Afghanistan. Boris Johnson didn't fare much better. How could these two world leaders have been so badly misinformed about the prospects of the Taliban resurging, reviving their fortunes and coming back into take over Afghanistan again? Because both of them said this would never happen, particularly Joe Biden, who was very forthright on it, said there was no chance of a Taliban takeover of Britain. How could these two prominent world leaders have been so badly misinformed?
Well, you and I could have told them otherwise, and so could all of the military leaders who were working in Afghanistan, who could see it on the ground that, in fact, the moment that we left that country, all resistance to the Taliban by the Afghan army, regardless of the fact that there were some brave members of those troops, that they would crumble immediately. They're not going to stand up and simply die in the face of Taliban gunfire. They're going to run. They're going to cut and run, just as the president did, allegedly to stop bloodshed, but basically to stop his own bloodshed. And there was no way, and we simply needed to make sure that we'd prepared for this so that we could leave in an orderly fashion. And people have been saying that this was like Saigon. It was nothing like Saigon. Saigon has been totally eclipsed by the way those people were clinging to those aircraft in desperation as it trundled up the runway, with half a dozen of them still on the wheels and falling off as it got into the skies. That will live in the memories not just of horrified Brits and Westerners generally, but in the minds of the Taliban and the Afghan people forever.
Politically, Biden is now in big trouble, I believe, because he thought he was backing a winning horse by saying, I'm going to pull our boys out and I'll see no more blood from American soldiers spilled on foreign soil. And that does have a lot of support in America and probably quite a lot here as well. But what Americans do not like is to see their own country humiliated on this epic international scale. Joe Biden has embarrassed his nation, hasn't he?
He has, and I was taken aback yesterday when I was talking to a very senior former Tory cabinet minister who said to me, Joe Biden's finished, isn't he? And I thought, well, that's a bit premature after 7 months or 8 months as president. But, I think that he is finished. I think his credibility has been smashed. He was already the sort of walking wounded with his constant sort of memory failures and missteps. I think that we have a lame duck president literally within the first year of his presidency. And what is worse, there's no vice president of any merit waiting in the wings to take over. I think we're faced with a dreadful situation in terms of the leadership of the world superpower.
Exactly. We have, I think it's safe to say, we have a president who is definitely not up to the job. And that's not a new situation, but they are usually these incompetent presidents surrounded by fairly competent advisors. But it strikes me that Joe Biden is definitely incompetent, doesn't even have his marbles, if you ask me. But I think he's surrounded by incompetent advisors as well. I mean, he had to be persuaded to come up from Camp David to make that speech yesterday, didn't want to come. I mean, it's extraordinary, isn't it?
It is. And frankly, the only reason that Biden is in the White House at all is because of the universal loathing of Donald Trump on the sides, on the part of the Democratic Party. And as a result of the failures within the Democratic Party, the only candidate they had to win the election was Joe Biden, a man of 78. I mean, he's a little older than I am, and I certainly do not think that I could take on the role of leading the world, leading the biggest nation in the world, the biggest economy, the biggest military power. And I do not believe that, nor do I believe that Joe Biden is. And I think that we're landed with a lame duck, and were actually from January the 1st this year.
And I think what is going to come back to haunt him, I think every day in every way, every time anyone mentions Afghanistan, a shudder is going to go up Joe Biden's spine because he says he's got no regrets. Trust me, he's got regrets. He is in a kind of political agony over this and always will be. But going forward, you feel he'll be a neutered president. And I think that what will come back to haunt him even more, and this is what I want your comment on, Trevor, is the fact that the Taliban are currently presenting their new improved image. We're the nice guys. We're not like the guys before. But as soon as the Americans and the Brits are finally out of there, they're going to revert to form, aren't they? The darkness will descend again.
I think sadly and tragically, they're already reverting to form. We've heard reports of Taliban commanders ordering house-to-house searches and lists made of every female over the age of 12 and under the age of 45 for the use and enjoyment of the valiant troops, of victorious troops. The thing that's going to haunt the West and Biden and America in particular is what will happen over the coming months and years in terms of terrorism on the streets of the Western world. And, one of the most chilling things that emerged from the Taliban takeover was the comment from the guy who had spent 8 years in Guantanamo Bay. Now, he's not going to forgive and forget. He's not going to emerge as part of a new enlightened Taliban leadership. He will want some sort of revenge, and he won't be alone.
Yes, I mean, Afghanistan now, I suspect, has become a worse incubator of terrorism than it ever was, and it was always bad. It is now going to be the world centre of terrorism, and many fear that they may want to bookend their 20 years in the wilderness, if you like, with the terrible 9/11 event, and they may want to bookend it with another awful terrorist attack. And if that happens in America, Joe Biden really is finished. Can I just ask you a last question, Trevor? I mean, you and I, we're not known for our bleeding heart tendencies, but I do feel deeply for the people of Afghanistan as the Taliban take over again. And I do feel that we owe lots of them who have worked with us over the 20 years and the Americans refuge. We ought to try to save them if we can. However, I'm worried about a lot of these virtue signalling politicians today, including several Tories who said we've got to let every single one of them in. Every single one, every single Afghan that wants to come here, we've got to let them in. Well, I'll tell you what will happen if we do that. And they're saying, let's not make the qualifications too stringent. Just let them in. Well, if we do that, I'll tell you who'll turn up. There'll be members of the Taliban to carry out terrorism here. I'm just a bit worried about the idea that the fact that Afghanistan is going through this awful chaos, that we may open our borders too much to those poor forlorn people.
I think you have every reason to be worried on this, Kevin, and I think all of us must be. The hundreds of people who are traveling across the Channel every day include all sorts of people, many of them justified refugees seeking sanctuary, some of them, and probably significant numbers or proportion of them, who may have other motives, and we simply don't know what they are. But I suspect that the ISIS and other organizations who do not have our best interests at heart are using this as a way of conveying people who are sleepers for the future, and one day, and as I say, in the not too distant future, will be triggered. The Taliban is not just in Afghanistan, it's also in Pakistan. And its tentacles spread far and wide. China and Russia are filling the vacuum now left behind by the Americans. All of this adds up to extremely bad news for the West, and on the streets of Britain and Europe, and not in America as much, but in this neck of the woods, I think we face a lot of big challenges in the future.